Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So, today we're continuing our series on the book of Revelation. And we're already at part 8. We're going to be looking at chapters 10 and 11. 2 weeks ago, we did part 7, and we looked at chapters 8 and 9. It was about the 5th and the 6th trumpet. If you remember from this chart, there was the great quake, and there was volcanoes, and it caused the first 4 trumpets to be blown. And then God creates a pause, offering people one last chance to repent before the last 3 trumpets, the last 3 woes, right? And then in the 5th trumpet, we see one nation or kingdom rise up and attack another kingdom or nation. And the 6th trumpet is the retaliation. It's the strike back. And it's terrible. 2.7 billion people will die in this 5th and 6th trumpet. 1/3 of the world population. Likely nuclear weapons. Can't be sure. But it's going to be terrible. And it's not over. It's not like, okay, and it's over, and then everyone recovers, and everyone lives happily. No. And they mount an army of 200 million soldiers up at the Euphrates River. And it's about to get even uglier. So that's where we left things off after the 6th trumpet. And then, of course, we talked about the 144,000, kind of took a break there. But now today we're moving on from the army on the edge of the Euphrates River, 200 million soldiers. What's going to happen next? Everyone's wondering, is this the end? Is it going to be like the end of the world? I mean, it's pretty bad, right? So let's see what happens. You know what happens? Peace. A false prophet arises, known as the antichrist. And he brokers a peace agreement between these 2 nations that were going at each other. Now, when I told you one nation rises against another nation, I mentioned that there's a strong possibility that it's going to be Ishmael against Israel. And that's why they're right at the Euphrates River. And this Antichrist, he brokers a peace agreement. And Daniel had prophesied this would happen. Speaking about the Antichrist, in Daniel 9:27 says, then he, the Antichrist, will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. And then you say, well, that's no good. It's just going to last a week. No. Prophetically, 1 week means 7 years. It's a 7-year peace treaty that is brokered by the Antichrist. And you know what? A key piece of getting this agreement signed is that Israel will get to build a temple on the Temple Mount. That's like, wow. Okay? Because if you know, give you a little background in history for those that don't know, the Temple Mount is in Jerusalem. Okay? And Jerusalem belongs to Israel. So you say, so what's the big deal? They could just build a temple. Well, in 1967, the last big war that Israel was involved in involved many Arab nations, including Jordan. The Minister of Defense at the time, he finally reached a peace agreement. They signed with Jordan, and they conceded that the Temple Mount would be Muslim. that Israel would have all of Jerusalem and, that large territory, but right in the center of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, because it contained the Dome on the Rock and also the Al-Aqsa Mosque, they said, we're just going to respect that. We're going to give you that Dome of the Rock. That will be for the Muslims, and we'll have all the rest. And they agreed to that, and that was part of the peace agreement. But while it brought peace back then, it made a lot of people unhappy because forever they've been wanting to build a third temple and to put it on the Temple Mount where it belongs. But this agreement, well, they couldn't because they had agreed, no, that we'll leave that to the Muslims. But now with this new war, everything will be on the table again. And this antichrist is going to broker this peace agreement. He's going to get both parties, Ishmael and Israel, to agree to come to peace for 7 years, and they're going to let Israel build their temple on the Temple Mount. Okay? Now, about this temple. Speaking about a temple, God's holy temple was never simply a tent, a building, or structure, but it was an earthly dwelling place for the divine presence of God. We read here in Exodus 25:8, God said, have them make a sanctuary for me so that I may dwell among them. At the time he was talking, of course, of the tabernacle, which you see on the screen. But it was always from the beginning God's plan that I will be your God and you will be my people, and I will dwell amongst you. That was it from the very beginning. And so here in Exodus, he tells Moses, I want this sanctuary built so that I may dwell. And we know the presence of God was in the Holy of Holies, right in the midst of the camp of Israel. And the Israelites and the Jews till this day, they long for that. They long to have this temple so God could be in their midst, be with them. But they don't have a temple until this agreement's going to be signed. So you can see how excited and happy they're going to be with this agreement. And they'll make concessions on their side if they can get this. And the Antichrist is going to he's going to play that, and he's going to make this happen. Now, I'll give you a little history on the temples, because a lot of people have different ideas of the third temple. So we need to address that today. Okay? So there was the tabernacle, and that was a temporary dwelling because the Israelites were nomadic. They were in the desert and they'd be moving, so they would tear down the tent, roll it all up, and the Levites would carry it. They'd go to a new place and they'd set up the tabernacle again with everything that was there. And it was great because it could be moved, right? But when they finally came into the promised land, King David, he lived in Jerusalem. He had built himself a palace, and he says, God is still living in a tent, and I'm living in a palace. And he really had on his heart to build a temple for God, one made of stone, one of, solid, not a tent. And so he wanted to do that, but God said, no, I don't want you to do it. I want your son Solomon to build it. Okay? And so we see here in 1 Chronicles 28, it says, consider now, for the Lord has chosen you. This is David talking to his son Solomon. The Lord has chosen you to build a house as the sanctuary. Be strong and do the work. Then David gave his son Solomon the plans. And there's a picture here. I don't know if it was exactly like that, but this is what I found on the internet. But this was the very first temple, okay, going from the tabernacle to the first temple. This was done in 957 BC. And it was a glorious temple because Solomon was known to be the richest man on the planet. Everything was covered in gold. It was beautiful. But later, it was destroyed 400 years later by King Nebuchadnezzar in about 586 BC. Okay? So again, then Israel was without a temple, a dwelling for God to live amongst them. And then they built a second temple. This time it was King Herod that built it. And that was in the year 12 BC that the construction was finished. Okay? And King Herod, he was a great architect. Wasn't just a king. Sherry and I had the pleasure in 2019 of going. We went to Masada, where King Herod had built a palace for himself on top there. Unbelievable. The architecture, the things he had designed, the engineering, and all the contraptions for that time, he was like, wow. He was really pretty good. And he also built the second temple right in Jerusalem, okay? At the place it should be, on the Temple Mount. And the second temple, it took over 46 years to build it. That's how big it was and how magnificent it was, okay? And this second temple was there when Yeshua was on this earth. We read about it a lot, about when he went to the temple and he preached. It was this temple, the one built by King Herod, the second temple, okay, to give you some context. And when we read passages like Mark 13, 1 and 2, as Yeshua is going out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Teacher, look, what stones and what buildings." It was impressive, right? So we're saying, look at this building. And Yeshua said to him, "While you see these great buildings, I'm telling you, not one stone here will be left upon another. Every one will be torn down." He knows the future, right? He knows already the end of everything. So he's saying, well, you know, this is a beautiful building, but just to let you know, it won't be here forever. It's going to get torn down. And everything that God says gets accomplished. Even the prophet Daniel had prophesied that this would happen. In Daniel 9:25, he had written, after the 62 sevens, the Messiah will be put to death and will have nothing. And the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So he was talking of Messiah. He was talking about Yeshua. He was saying that, you know, after so many years, Yeshua will be killed, and the ruler of the people, well, who was the ruler? It was Rome at the time. They will come and they're going to destroy the city and the sanctuary. And this happened exactly like Yeshua and like Daniel said, because in the year 70 AD, the city was burnt by Rome, and the temple was completely destroyed. And that happened 40 years after Yeshua died on the cross, approximately. So just like Daniel had predicted it would happen. Now that was almost 70 AD. We're in 2024. That's almost 2,000 years ago now, that Israel has been without a temple where God could live in their midst. They've been longing and wanting that. For a long time, they didn't even have a country. And now they've had a country since, 1948? But no temple. So you see how important it is to them. They've been longing. They want this temple. And this will be a key part of the peace agreement between Ishmael and Israel, that they will get to build their temple on the Temple Mount. In fact, they're so anxious to do this that there's two organizations. There's the Temple Institute, as well as the Temple Mount and Eretz Israel Faithful Movement, two main Jewish organizations responsible for making preparations for the third temple and the reinstatement of the sacrificial worship. You know, as Fred is doing his series on the 613, we've often told you there's a lot of the 613 that we cannot do. Why? Because there's no Levite priest, there's no temple, and a lot of these need, for the burnt offerings, a Levite priest at the altar in Jerusalem at the temple there to do them, including our Passover lamb. These things can't be done, but if we get a new temple, a lot of these 613 will be back. Okay? But these two organizations, they have already made all the elements, the clothing required to operate the temple, even the golden menorah, which you see here. Our brother Miguel took a picture while he was recently in Israel of this very thing. Everything has been crafted, and even the Levitical musical instruments, such as the silver trumpets, the lyres, the harps, to worship the Lord. And the Temple Institute School, they claim they have already trained and certified DNA-tested priests that are descendants of the high priest Aaron. They've DNA tested them, and they're confirming their direct lines, because only them are allowed to operate, right, as priests. They've said, no, these people have been DNA tested, and they've been trained and ready to go. All they need is the temple. They even have the final element, which is the red heifer. If you don't know about the red heifer, it's like a beef. It's red in color. They're very, very rare, and they are required, okay, by Israel to be sacrificed in the ritual purification of the priests and the vessels, so that they may formally enter the holiest of holy. They even have the red heifer. Everything is ready for the rebuilding of the third temple. Everything except the land, and now the land, with this peace agreement, will take away the last thing, and they'll be able to move forward. Now you can understand that only an incredibly respected, trusted, and honored man by both the Muslims and the Jews will be able to establish such a peace agreement that allows the Jewish people to worship the Lord on the Temple Mount, exactly on the field that King David purchased. Let me show you. In 2 Samuel, give you a little context. David had sinned, and God was punishing Israel with a plague. And the plague was moving and killing many people that was coming towards Jerusalem. And then we read in 2 Samuel, on that day Gad came to David and said to him, "Go up, set up an altar to Adonai on the threshing floor of Araunah, the Jebusite." That was on the Temple Mount, okay? And so David runs up there, and he's going to put an altar and present some sacrifices to God as a plea to stop the plague, okay? But the field doesn't belong to him, right? This threshing floor belongs to Araunah. So it says here in verse 24, "But the king said to Araunah, 'No, but I will surely buy it from you at a price.'" Because Araunah says, "Here, take my field, and here's the oxen, do the thing." And David said, no, I'm going to pay you for this. I'm going to pay you. I'm going to buy the field. I'm going to buy the oxen. So he says, "I will not offer burnt offerings to Adonai my God that cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. Then David built there an altar to Adonai and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. So Adonai was moved by the prayer of entreaty for the land, and he restrained the plague from Israel. It was a success. So that threshing floor was huge. And David later used that exact land to build, well, Solomon built the first temple right on that threshing floor. Okay? And guess what, guys? That threshing floor is right there. It would not obstruct. They could make it happen, putting the third temple on the Temple Mount without having to destroy the Dome on a Rock or the outer mosque. They would be able to put it there. And so, can you imagine, for Israel, that's all they wanted, right? They wanted a temple, and they would want it right there where it belongs. And this is what the Antichrist is going to make happen. It's going to be wow, right? Now, this is some of what I wanted to address about the third temple. Many are expecting the third temple to be like the first two, like Solomon's or Herod's temple, built with wood and stone, referred to in Greek by the word Heron. Can you guys say that? Heron. Okay, not King Herod. Heron. And we see that term Heron several times in the New Testament, like here, Matthew 21:12. Yeshua entered the temple, the Heron. This is one built with brick and stone, right? He's talking about the second temple, the temple of Herod. Yeshua entered the temple, and he drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. You remember that story? That's a great story. That was in the temple, the Heron, the one made of stone, the solid one, okay? And again, like the passage we saw in Matthew 24, Yeshua left the Heron, the temple, and was walking away when his disciples came to him and called the attention to the buildings. So this kind of temple, Heron, is one made of solid, right? Like this building. Okay? However, it's often overlooked that when Paul is referring to the third temple in the end times, he's not using the word Heron for temple. He's using the Greek word naon. Not neon, but naon. And that refers to a temporary dwelling. Let's look at it. 2 Thessalonians. He will oppose, the Antichrist, will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worship, so that he, the Antichrist, sets himself up in God's temple. Notice, it's not the word for the hard concrete building, but naon, the one that means the temporary dwelling. And it's the same word used in Revelation 15, referring to the tabernacle in heaven. Look here. After this is John writing, I, John, looked in heaven, and the temple, naos, that is, the tabernacle of the testimony, was open. He's not referring to a stone building like this one. He's referring to a naos, a temporary building. He's even calling it a tabernacle like the one Moses had. Why is this significant? Because the tent of meeting that Moses instructed the Israelites to make was actually modeled after the temple in heaven. Look at Hebrews 8:5. They serve at a sanctuary that is a copy and shadow of what is in heaven. This is why Moses was warned when he was about to build the tabernacle. See to it that you make everything according to the pattern shown you on the mountain. The pattern that was shown to Moses when he was up on Mount Sinai was that of the tabernacle in heaven. And he was given its exact dimensions, and God wanted Moses to build a replica, a shadow, a copy of what was in heaven. And that's what he had there. Well, you saw the picture earlier. And Miguel did a great series on the tabernacle about that. So we see that the word Paul used regarding the temple, where the antichrist sets himself up, is one that is also temporary dwelling, and not a temple made of stone. Okay? And note that the word Paul uses is also the same word that is used for us, being the spiritual temple. Look at 1 Corinthians. Do you not know that you are the temple? Now, we're not the temple made of stone, right? We're a temporary dwelling. You're the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you. If any man destroys the temple, now, of God, God will destroy him. For the temple now of God is holy, and that is what you are. The temple is holy, and that's what we are, because we are the temple of God when he lives in us. It's only when he lives in us that is holy, right? If God is not living in us, obviously it's not holy. He's the one that makes it holy. So, because of this, some people believe that a third temple will never be built. And that this temple, the Antichrist sets himself up in, is actually the hearts of Yahweh's people. Because we're a temporary dwelling, and it says the Antichrist is going to set himself up in a temporary dwelling. So people are saying, they're putting one and one together and saying, this is the abomination, that the Antichrist will set himself up in the hearts of Yahweh's people. Now, is that possible? Let me ask you a question. God's temple is holy because he's in it. If the Antichrist sets himself up in this temple, is it still the temple of God? Is it still holy? And how can we call ourselves Yahweh's people if the Antichrist is in our heart instead of God? I don't believe this at all. And this is what I want to diffuse, because a lot of people, sadly, they think, well, no, it says it's a temporary dwelling, so it has to be in our hearts that the Antichrist can set himself. I'm saying, no. There's an alternative. Okay? I believe it's better understood that the third temple will actually be a temporary dwelling, yes, but like the tabernacle, the one that Moses saw in heaven and made a copy of and was built in the desert, it's going to be a tabernacle instead of a temple made of stone. And Paul is telling us that halfway through the 7-year peace agreement, the Antichrist will set himself up in this very tabernacle, not in people's hearts. He's going to set himself up in this tabernacle on the Temple Mount and proclaim himself as God, as we see in this passage. The Antichrist will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worship, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, the temporary one, the tabernacle, proclaiming himself to be God. You know, we read in Daniel, I'm saying halfway through the 7 years, because in Daniel 9:27, that's what it says. Halfway through the 7-year peace agreement. You know, it says he will make a covenant with many for 7 years. In the middle of the 7, that makes 3.5 years, or 42 months, or 1,260 days. I'm not saying that to show off that I'm good in math. It's because you'll see these 3 numbers appear in different places, and they're all referring to the same 3.5 year period. Okay? in the middle of the 7, he will put an end to the sacrifice and offering. So, wow. He brokered this peace agreement, and a key part of it was that they would be able to build their tabernacle exactly on the threshing floor, on the Temple Mount. And this is what the people have been waiting for so long, so they can reinstitute the priestly service and do the sacrifices and the offerings, right? And then the Antichrist that brokered this, halfway through, he does what? He puts an end to the sacrifice and the offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So he's going to be doing this until he gets what he deserves, because God's going to punish him, right? But what you need to understand, two things happen here halfway through. He puts an end to the sacrifice and the offerings made at the temple, and he sets up an abomination that causes desolation. And people ask, okay, how will he put an end to the sacrifice and the offering? Will he make a decree? Come in there and say, okay, no more. It's got to stop, and put some like that? Or it could be that the abomination that causes desolation will cause the sacrifice and offerings to stop. We've seen this with the Maccabees and the Greeks, right? The Greeks came and overpowered in Israel in that time, and what did they do? They sacrificed a pork on the altar, desecrating the temple. It was an abomination. When that happens, they couldn't continue the sacrifices or the offerings. The whole temple had to go through the purification and everything, right? So you can put an end to the sacrifice and an offering by doing something like that, causing an abomination that causes desolation. I think what he's going to do in that tabernacle, they're going to have to discontinue the sacrifices, because they'd have to go through a whole new purification. That's my guess. Instead of him telling them, okay, you guys got to stop the sacrifices. I think they're linked. But one thing is certain. The peace agreement, including the temple, the tabernacle on the mount, halfway through the 7 years, the Antichrist was going to cause trouble. Okay? Now, enough with the temple. We've got other stuff to cover. I said we'd be covering chapters 10 and 11. I haven't even started yet. Let's start chapter 10, verse 1. It says, then I, who's I? It's John. He's writing Revelations. Then John saw another powerful angel coming down from heaven, wrapped in a cloud with a rainbow over his head. His face was like the sun, and his feet like pillars of fire. He had in his hand a little scroll that was open. He set his right foot on the sea and his left foot on the land. And he cried out with a loud voice, just as a lion roars. And when he cried out, the 7 thunders spoke. And when the 7 thunders had spoken, I was about to write, but I heard a voice from heaven saying, seal up what the 7 thunders have said. Do not write it down. Then the angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised his right hand towards heaven and swore by the one with a capital O, which is Yeshua, who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and what is in it, the earth and what is in it, the sea and what is in it, that there would be no more delay. But in the days of the voice of the 7th angel, when he is about to trumpet, the mystery of God is completed, just as he declared to his servants the prophets. Then the voice that I heard from heaven spoke to me again, saying, go, take the scroll that is open in the hand of the angel, standing on the sea and on the land. So I went to the angel, telling him to give me the little scroll. And he tells me, take and eat it. It will be bitter to your stomach, but sweet as honey in your mouth. So I took the little scroll from the angel's hand and I ate it. It was sweet as honey in my mouth, but when I had swallowed it, my stomach was made bitter. And they tell me, you must prophesy again about many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. So after the sixth trumpet, during that 3.5 year rule of the antichrist, John sees an angel come down from heaven with a small scroll, and he tells him to eat it. Not like Michael Jackson there. Is it eat it or is beat it? This small scroll contains a message that John is to proclaim to all. And this is very similar to the Old Testament passages where Ezekiel is told to eat the contents of a scroll so that he can also deliver a message to the people. Let's read about it. Ezekiel 2. Now you, God speaking to Ezekiel, son of man, hear what I say to you. Do not be rebellious like the rebellious house. Open your mouth and eat what I am giving to you. I looked, and behold, a hand was stretched out to me, holding a written scroll. He spread it out before me. It was written on front and back. Written on it were lamentations, mourning, and woe. Then in chapter 3, verse 1 to 3, it says, Then he said to me, Son of man, eat what you find. Eat this scroll. Then go, speak to the house of Israel. So I opened my mouth, and he gave me that scroll to eat. As he said to me, Son of man, feed your belly with the scroll that I am giving you, and fill your stomach with it. I ate it, and it tasted as sweet as honey. So this is very similar, and it's not about the eating part. It's like, take this message in yourself, and I want you to go out now that it's in you, and I want you to proclaim this message to the people. Okay? So in the end times, this is the end times, right? During these 3.5 year rule, God still wants the message to go out. He still cares about people's salvation. He still wants people to wake up, to turn around, and to repent. It's still not too late. Okay? We see 2 more testimonies of this happening. In Revelation 14, God sends 3 angels with messages. We read about it here. And then I saw another angel flying high in the sky, having a timeless message of good news to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. He said in a loud voice, Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship the one who made heaven and earth and sea and springs of water. Then another angel, a second one, followed him, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink of the wine of the fury of her immorality. And another angel, a third one, followed them, saying in a loud voice, If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, he shall also drink the wine of God's fury, poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone before the holy angels and before the Lamb. The smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. Those who worship the beast and its image, and those who receive the mark of his name have no rest day or night. Here is the perseverance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Yeshua. Who are the saints? Those that keep the Torah. Those that keep the commandments of God. So you see, God cares so much about us that he repeatedly sends out warning messages to try to help us wake up and turn to him. Those three angels, they come out just before the seventh trumpet. But 3.5 years earlier, God sends two witnesses, again with a message to the people. We see it here, Revelations 11, verse 3-6. And I will grant authority to my two witnesses. This is God speaking. And they will prophesy for 1,260 days. How long is 1,260 days? 3.5 years. 42 months. They're going to be dressed in sackcloth. And these are the two olive trees and the two menorot that are standing before the Lord of the earth. Now, if anyone wishes to harm them, fire comes out of their mouths and consumes their enemies. If anyone wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. These two have the power to shut the heavens so that no rain may fall during the days of their prophesying, during 3.5 years. And they have power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every kind of plague as often as they wish. Now some people say, who are these two witnesses of God? Now many say it's exactly. Sounds like Moses and Elijah. The same two that were there at the transfiguration on the mountain, right? During Sukkot, when God was there and then appeared next to them, Moses and Elijah. Some people say it's them, and you know why? Because which prophet had the power to stop the rain? Elijah. He did that over Israel because of the wicked Ahab and his wife Jezebel, right? So they say, oh, that sounds like Elijah. And who turned the Nile into blood and sent the many plagues? Moses, right? So they're saying, hey, it sounds like Elijah and Moses. It may be. It may be. They're going to do that for 3.5 years. Okay? And let's read what happens next. When they have finished their testimony, at the end of the 3.5 years, the beast that arises from the abyss will make war on them and overcome them and kill them. And their corpses will lie in the open street of the great city that figuratively is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Where was the Lord crucified? Jerusalem. This is happening in Jerusalem. Some from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their corpses for 3.5 days, not allowing them to be placed into a grave. Those who dwell on earth will rejoice over them. They will celebrate and send gifts to one another, because these two prophets tormented those who dwell on the earth, because they spoke the truth. People will celebrate over their death. They're going to send each other gifts like at Christmas. They say, we won, we got rid of those two people. We couldn't stand it any longer. They kept harassing us with the Word of God all the time. Well, there you go. They're done with. Over. Now, question. Who killed the two witnesses? Anybody? The beast. And where did the beast come from? The abyss. And who opened the abyss? We talked about this 2 parts ago. The angel that had fallen. Remember we talked about that? And who was that angel that had fallen from heaven to earth? Satan. And we read that he had opened the abyss. And I had mentioned at that time that that's where the power of the beast is going to come out of. And we're seeing this today. Out of that, Satan drew out of this abyss the beast. And this beast overcame and killed God's 2 witnesses. This beast is working with the false prophet, the antichrist, against God and against all of his followers. Let's continue, see what happens after this. But after the 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood up, the 2 witnesses, on their feet, and great fear fell on those who were watching them. Imagine those that were celebrating and exchanging gifts. They must have said, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And then they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. It's talking about the 2 witnesses. Come up here. And they went up to heaven in a cloud while their enemies watched them. At that hour, there was a great earthquake, and a tenth of the city, Jerusalem, collapsed. 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to God of heaven. And it says, the second woe is past. The third woe is coming. Do you remember about the 3 woes? I said there was the first 4 trumpets, right? And then this eagle in Revelation 8:13, the eagle crying out with a loud voice that flew high in the sky saying, woe, woe, woe to those who dwell on the earth, because the remaining blast of the trumpets, the 3 angels, number 5, 6, and 7, are about to sound. So the first woe is trumpet number 5. The second woe is what? And so it says here, the second woe is past. We just finished the 6th trumpet. And the 7th is about to come. The third woe. Okay? Woe already. Okay? Now, during those 3.5 years, the false prophet, a.k.a. the Antichrist, will be allowed to rule the earth. He'll do that from Jerusalem. And he will persecute those that try to keep the Torah. Look at Daniel 7:25. He will speak words against the Most High, the Antichrist, or the false prophet, same person, and will continually harass the saints of the Most High, and will try to change the appointed times, the Moedim, and the law. What law? The saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. That's another way of saying 42 months, 1,260 days, or 3.5 years. A time is 1 year. Times, 2 more years. That's 3 years. And half a time, half a year. 3.5 years. See how many ways you can say 3.5 years? And at the end of the 3.5 years, the Antichrist will do something that will trigger the last woe, the 7th trumpet. You know what that is? He's going to set up the abomination that causes desolation. Again, Daniel 9:27. The Antichrist, the false prophet, will confirm a covenant with many for 7 years. And in the middle of the 3.5 years, he will put an end to the sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation. This is the trigger. When that happens, that's when the 7th trumpet's going to blow. Okay? And God warned about that. When Yeshua was here, again, where do we go? If you want to know about the end times, Yeshua told you everything's going to happen in the end times in Matthew chapter 24. Let's read about it. So when you see, this is Yeshua speaking to his disciples, when you see the abomination of desolation, whatever that false prophet, the antichrist, is going to do in the temple, which was spoken about by Daniel the prophet, the one we just read about, standing in the holy place, he's in the tabernacle, in the holy, not the holy of holies, but the holy place, then those in Judea must flee to the mountains. The one on the roof must not go down to take what is in his house, and the one in the field must not turn back to get his coat. Woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. Pray that your escape will not happen in winter or on Shabbat, for then there will be great trouble, such as has not happened since the beginning of the world until now, nor will ever happen. And unless those days were cut short, no one would be delivered. No one would survive. But for the sake of the chosen, those days will be cut short. Yeshua said, when this happens, the seventh trumpet is going to blow, and watch out. Because this is the third and the last woe, and it's going to be the worst that you've ever seen on planet Earth here. And I'm just going to give you a quick look. We're not going to get into it because I got to keep it for another part, right? But you see here the whole book of Revelations. And I've been taking you through, you've seen the seven seals, right? The seventh seal is the beginning of is about the seven trumpets. So you see how it loops back and it starts then at the first trumpet, second trumpet, and so on. And we went through all the trumpets, and we saw the fifth and the sixth, the big war, and now the peace agreement. And today we're getting just at the point of the seventh trumpet, right at the end here. Next time we'll be talking here, seventh trumpet. And what's the seventh trumpet? It goes back here, and this is the seven trumpets. The seventh trumpet causes these seven last plagues. Okay? I put some arrows there to try to help, but I don't know if it came out very well. But when the seventh trumpet blows, it's the last trumpet. And when is Yeshua coming back? At the last trumpet. He's coming back at the seventh trumpet. But that's not the only thing that happens at the seventh trumpet. There's also these seven plagues that's going to happen. Okay? And we'll look at that in another time. So stay tuned. But for today, we saw that the Antichrist, a.k.a. the false prophet, it's the same person. And he will bring the war to an end. He's going to broker this peace agreement between Ishmael and Israel after 2.7 billion people have died. And a key part of this peace agreement between Ishmael and Israel will see Israel build a third temple on the Temple Mount. And the third temple, like I said, it's not going to be made like this building. It won't be a permanent brick and mortar place, okay? But rather it's going to be a tabernacle like the one in Moses' day. And for 3.5 years, the Antichrist will rule from Jerusalem, and during which time there still remains a message to be delivered to the world. We saw the 3 angels. We saw the 2 witnesses. They'll be there in Jerusalem for 1,260 days, and they're going to be prophesying, likely Moses and Elijah, until the beast kills them. And the 7th trumpet will be triggered by the abomination that causes desolation, set up by the Antichrist in the temple, what we just read about. When that happens, like Yeshua says, run. Run for the hills. Because, like we saw, these 7 plagues are going to come. Okay? So stay tuned for next time. I'm going to close in prayer, and then we'll stop. Lord, thank you. Thank you for your word. And while the book of Revelation contains some scary moments that we know are coming in the very near future, we also know that you are in control. And you have written the book. And you have proclaimed there is victory in the end for you and for all those that keep your commandments. And Lord, we take comfort in that, and we seek to line up our lives in the right order to honor you. Lord, I pray that you help us prepare for what is coming. I pray this in the mighty name of Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen.